You okay there? Yeah. That's the screen that will come up with my presentation. Thank you, and thank you very much for coming to my session. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of why I've done this study. So traumatic musculoskeletal injuries are common globally, and there's estimated over 500,000 traumatic injuries in the UK annually. Rehabilitation can be long, it can be up to 12 months and beyond, and recovery is often deemed as suboptimal. Successful recovery is often viewed as pain reduction. However, this definition really does lack a broad understanding of the patient experience. It's currently unknown what's actually important to the patients in their recovery and what successful recovery means to them. So the overall aim of the study was to explore patients' views and perceptions of recovery and what constitutes successful recovery following musculoskeletal trauma. So the study itself actually did 3 interviews, and I'm doing the results today for the 4-week interview and the 6-month interview, but we also did a 12-month interview, which is in the very final stages of analysis. The inclusion criteria was anyone over 18, had sustained a musculoskeletal injury and was admitted to a major trauma centre in the West Midlands within 4 weeks of injury. We excluded anyone with a primary TBI injury or neurological injury because they have a different pathway to the complex musculoskeletal pain, musculoskeletal trauma population. We did IPA analysis, and we had various strategies for trustworthiness. We had patient and public involvement throughout the study, from actually designing the study through to data analysis and the presentation of the themes. Now, I'm not expecting you to be able to see or read that diagram, and it's not there for you to read. It just hopefully gives you an idea of the complexity of our results that we had for this first interview at 4 weeks. The red shows things that could potentially hinder someone's recovery, the green being something that may help, and the blue being a process that someone goes through as they go through this early stages of recovery. So I'm going to talk through a little bit now of the kind of key themes and findings of this first 4-week interview. So the first theme was very much understanding of the accident and the injuries and the impact that had. So they tried to make sense of what had actually happened to them in terms of the injuries they sustained and the accident, and trying to understand why that had actually happened to them in terms of the accident itself. The impact of the injuries was very vast. This had lots of different ranges, but one of the specific things that someone talked about was that lack of independence, so that was taken away from them. They had this feeling of being a burden to others, so they felt very, very emotional when they talked about this, that because of what had happened, they felt a burden on their family, their friends, and to a certain extent, healthcare. There was a feeling of anger. Sometimes this feeling of anger was maybe internally towards them, but potentially externally to maybe the accident, or felt that they weren't particularly, there was a blame being placed somewhere else. There was anger and fear, and they very much felt worried that they may re-damage something, and that they potentially could be like this forever, and they didn't really understand what their outlook potentially would look like. There was this feeling of gratitude towards healthcare professionals, and they almost sometimes started to see it as maybe a positive impact on their lifestyle. So some may describe it that they potentially might give up smoking or change their diet as a consequence of the injuries. The second theme is more around physiotherapy and healthcare. And unfortunately, you can see on the left-hand side, these are all in the red. So they did feel like there was confusion, mixed messages, and they didn't feel like they really knew what was going on. You can see with the quote I've just put up there, they had one person saying one thing, another person coming to say a different thing, and then a third person saying another thing. And this often sometimes happened in just one day. There was a feeling that there was a lack of patient-centred care, and there was a real focus on the management of the injuries rather than the patient themselves. And they felt that when they did get to that discharge point, it was often rushed, it was early, and often they felt it was too soon to be discharged. And they did feel that when they actually interacted with the physios, that again, it was more checklist driven, and they were doing more of a tick box exercise rather than focusing on that individual in front of them. And then the third theme, I've just gone into a little bit more detail here, and I've put more as a bit of a journey, and you can see with the road, it's a winding road, you can go forwards, backwards, up and down. And what was really interesting with the participants that we recruited was that we had a wide range of injury severity. So we had someone that had a very simple injury that maybe needed some surgical fixation to someone that was really, really more complex, that had multiple injuries. And it didn't really seem to matter the injury severity that they had. They all seemed to go through this journey. So what you often found with this is that it was a journey that people went through, and it was very much guided by healthcare. They found that it was very time-focused. They were using that time point to try and help guide them through this. So it'll be 6 weeks until I'm doing this. It will 3 months until I'm doing this. Pain was an issue, which you can understand, and it was quite insignificant pain that they described. And as a consequence of that, if they were using pain medication to help that, then the actual side effects of those were actually quite significant, and it did hinder their ability to engage in recovery and rehab. They did find that their network of support was integral, so they really felt that their support that they were getting from their family was really important. They did start to try and accept what had happened and try to move forward rather than looking backwards, and everyone did vary on where they were in this particular journey. They did start to try and establish what their recovery journey did look like, and they used goals to try and help them do that. So I want to be able to get to the toilet, I want to be able to walk, I want to be able to go home. They did try and use internal motivation and positivity as a method to try and help them through this early stages, and this feeling that the more effort they put in, the more reward they got from that. And what was really fascinating was that this definition of successful recovery was, I want to get back to normal. I want to be how I was before. And again, I've put 3 quotes up here of all different injury severities, and they're all the same. It doesn't matter what injury they had, they wanted to get back to how they were before. So the key findings from this 4-week interview was that injury severity didn't appear to matter. The identified key areas which are important to focus on need to have a shift in how we think around the patient in this early stages. It does unfortunately highlight the shortcomings that we have around communication, lack of patient-centred care, and the pressures within the NHS system which are contributing to this. In terms of successful recovery, this is very much defined as normal. Pain didn't come into this. It was really a focus on their function and getting back to what they wanted to do before. And now we need to really understand that patient journey towards more of a later stage rather than just the acute phase. And funnily enough, that's what I'm going to talk about now. So we're going to skip on now to the 6-month interview. Okay, so I've just used here just to compare, because I didn't really talk about it in that shorter presentation for the 4-week interview. So we did recruit 17 participants for the first interview that we analysed. We did lose a few, which we were expecting, because it's really common within this cohort to lose lost to follow-up. So we lost 4 from the 17 participants for the first week to the 6-month interview. You can see we've had a range of different mechanisms of injury, and this is really a typical presentation of the cohort that we're looking at. We had differences in terms of multiple injuries and single injuries, and we used the injury severity score as a way of quantifying this. So this is a really common measure that's used within major trauma to try and categorise the injuries. So the 3 main themes that we found for the 6-month interview was healthcare clinicians' impact recovery, the journey recovery, and the outcome. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of these three. So the first theme then. So the participants really struggled with this feeling of uncertainty, and they actually struggled even more when the healthcare that they were particularly engaging with, whether that was physio or the consultants, didn't have all the answers for them. So if they didn't know how long it would take for them to recover, they found that actually really challenging to deal with. Why do they not know they're supposed to be the experts? And they found that really challenging. There was this feeling that actually the outpatient care system was actually quite fractured. Some actually really struggled to get into the system. Some, once they were there, actually find it really difficult to navigate. So it was really, really hard for them to actually get into to see who they wanted to see. And they did describe this as falling off a cliff. They had excellent care in that acute phase, and then when they were discharged, around kind of 3 to 6 months, they were really, really struggling and felt that actually they didn't have that support they needed. Again, this communication, lack of communication, confusing communication did come through. And again, some participants described this as a roller coaster and how that management changed as they were progressing. When they did get to see physios, they were very, very complimentary on that emotional support that they've had from physiotherapists, which is fantastic. And there was this real kind of focus to physical. So even though they acknowledged that there was a lot of things going on emotionally, potentially psychologically, that actually their focus at this point in time was the physical. Second theme, I've actually used again the road, but you can see there's different themes here. So again, remember this is at 6 months following injury. So they're very much still reflecting on what's happened, okay, and their recovery progress, so where they are now. But they're also still actually processing what's happened to them still at 6 months, the accident and injuries, what's actually happened, and trying to still understand that. On top of that, they do have a range of different personal impacts of the injuries. So this was maybe financial worry, not being able to return to work, lack of independence, lack of social independence. And this feeling that they had to constantly, consciously plan and adapt everything they did. So simple things like taking something to the bin, feeding the cat, they were having to constantly think about how they were actually going to do that. And they talked about that in a lot of detail. On top of that, they were having to navigate through a range of different emotions, and these were all negative emotions, so worry, fear, anxiety. So if you think they're still thinking about the injury, they're still processing that, they're having to think about everything they're doing, and then they've got these emotions on top of it. This is a lot of psychological burden that someone's going to have to actually deal with, and the fact that they're not getting the support they need at that moment in time. They did talk about moving on and accepting what had actually happened to them. And they used other people's experiences to really try to make sense of that journey. They did, however, use hope through recovery. So they used what had actually happened to that point in time to really help them navigate through that. And in terms of their definition, in terms of successful recovery, it was the same thing again. And I'll show this in the third theme. So to get to that kind of successful recovery, they used different strategies for success. So these were very individual. So often they talked about positivity and different things to help them to get to that point. They did use established personalised goals to get there, and this feeling that it was getting back to their normal. They really, really needed to make sure that actually they get back to how they were before, again, irrespective of injury or severity. So the key findings here is that processing of the injury and accident is still happening at this 6-month period. There is a lot for the patients to think about at this moment in time. This could potentially impact on engagement. We know from a research point of view, they often drop off at this last moment around this area, but actually, could that actually impact on them engaging in rehab? Normally is what is important. We need to be thinking about the person rather than the injury severity or the type of injury that they have, and a less focus to pain. It does highlight this complexity in accessing care and shortfalls of the current provision, and actually depending on where they are they getting different forms of care. So hopefully this has highlighted what you already know, that it is complex, but we do need to look beyond injury severity now and not focus on what injuries they have, and it's getting back to normal and what that means for the patient. And we need to actually celebrate what we do well, because we do a lot of things well. And I'd just like to say, just before I finish, that big shout out to all the people that have helped me do this research and my funders, which is the CSP's Charitable Trust and the Private Education Fund. And I welcome any questions.
Thank you. First question. Just wait while we...
Thank you ever so much, Nicola. There's so much to go at. The thing that jumped out to me is, what did you learn in relation to those people where return to normal isn't an option? And how do they deal with that over time? And anything maybe you could say that you're finding from your 12-month interviews?
So in terms of the ones that have a more major severity, so as part of the ones we had people that maybe had an amputation or things that were, as we would describe, life-changing. What we found is that definition didn't change, but how they actually did those returning to normal did. So they started to adapt stuff. So to them, it was, yeah, I'm still going to do exactly what I did before, but actually that how I'm going to do that journey changes over time, so that, okay, if they wanted to walk to the shop, they would do that in a slightly different way to be able to do that. And that does come through in the 12-month interview, that actually there's a big shift in their mindset. So whereas they're very reliant on healthcare and them having the answers, it completely changes at 12 months. And a lot of them still don't find themselves as recovered, but the way they think is very different.
Thank you.
Hello, lovely presentation, thank you. Lisa, clinical academic hand therapist from London in a major trauma centre. I noticed from your demographics that there were no stabbings. We see quite a lot of patients with stab injuries, body, arm, hands. And I wondered whether you'd looked, one, maybe we just get more stabbings in London. Two, whether there were that clientele perhaps didn't agree to sign up to your study and they're missing and maybe have different perspectives. And as part of that, whether you'd considered sort of socioeconomic status, access to support, natural support groups, family support, and whether that played a role in recovery expectations. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. So I've known from previous research before I've done this that trying to recruit people that have had stabbings is actually really, really challenging, and it was part of this, but we just didn't recruit any, and that is a challenge of trying to be able to include those people that are really difficult to access. We did with, again, it wasn't stabbings, but we recruited more than the 17 participants that we actually interviewed, but from that point where we recruited them to doing the interview, then they dropped out, which is such a common thing with them. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. We do need to be able to try and get those people in. In terms of trying to be inclusive for different socioeconomic backgrounds, obviously I didn't go into the detail of where they came from and that side of things, but we did try to be inclusive in terms of how we did the interviews. So this was done over kind of the back end of COVID, so things were shifted to online rather than me going out to places, but we incorporated telephone interviews rather than just electronic teams to be able to be inclusive, and then people did take that up. So there was a small proportion of participants that did. I think access is really important. So I think one of the participants actually was quite openly said they were quite affluent, and she actually felt very guilty because she couldn't access the care, so she paid for it. And she kept saying, how would anyone be able to do what I've done without that access? So it's such an important point, and it does need to be something that we address moving forward when we're trying to support these patients.
Thank you, Nicola. Lisa Roberts from Southampton. That is absolutely brilliant work and so important. I was fascinated by what you said about the inconsistencies in messages, and I wondered if there were themes about that. Was that in terms of recovery or in what people should be doing, or what was that about? Thank you.
Yeah. So what I haven't presented here was we actually did some focus groups with some physios as well, to have a look at what we thought versus what actually the patient thought, and there was some differences in terms of that. So there was very much a focus to the actual injury. So there was this almost kind of bit of a preconception of, well, if they've got a major injury, they can't possibly get back to where they want to be. And I think that then came through in the results for the patients, how they said I couldn't do this, and actually maybe I should be able to do this. I want to do this, and that's where the frustration and things came in terms of the kind of breakdown between that relationship. Then, of course, all the NHS pressures. It was really, really hard to listen to the physios. They didn't want to be doing what they did. They wanted to be able to do more, but just did not have the resource.
Thank you. We're just coming to the end, but can I just ask you, Nicola, has anything changed in terms of what you're doing in the service already?
Not immediately. So I'm not within clinical practice, but what I'm doing is working with my partners to try and actually see what we can implement in that really crucial point. So that's my next thing I want to do, is try and implement something that's actually really, really simple that anyone can do. It doesn't have to be a specialist trauma physio, that they could be a physio that's in the community that can actually use the toolkit to be able to then go, okay, I have this person. So it helps with that inequality. If they are going out, it goes back to the point around kind of bringing the physio to them rather than them having to come to the big centres.
Thank you. And we'd like to thank you very much for bringing your research here. Thank you, Nicola.
Okay, thank you.